Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
A look back at 2020 tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Thanks for joining us as we continue to do the show remotely. I am joined this week by a roundtable of journalists talking about the year that was and looking ahead to 2021. First up is Laura Faith Cabetta, reporter with Chalkbeat. Laura, thanks for joining us.
Sure thing.
Toby Sells is news editor with the Memphis Flyer. Toby, thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir.
And Bill Dries is a reporter with the Daily Memphian. I'll start with just a question for all, a couple of questions for all of y'all, and we'll talk a ton about COVID because obviously that defines so much in 2020. But we will talk about other things and things that again, looking to some world without COVID in 2021, we hope. But for each of you, and I'll start with you, Laura, for each of you, just the biggest impact that COVID had in the stories you cover, and you focus on education, so that's an easy one because the schools have been just hit so hard in so many different ways. But what stands out when you look back at this year and when you look ahead to 2021 in the schools and COVID?
Well, yeah, I mean, like you said, it's so broad. Everything changed. As of now, schools are still, with the largest district in Shelby County, is all remote. So that means that all students are learning through a computer, and that has been the case since August. And that has changed how learning is delivered completely. And this year was also, in order to make that happen, all students in Shelby County schools receive laptops, which was definitely a new thing that hadn't been true if COVID hadn't come through.
And you know what? Excuse me. As we record this right now, what's SES going to do in January? You know, I mean, there's surveys that teachers don't want to come back. I mean, what do you think the first January, February, March looks like for Shelby County schools?
Well, as of now, the earliest that SES is planning to go back is February. And who knows, honestly, like there's been, what has been consistent is that the superintendent has said that if the health care or health numbers aren't favorable from what he sees as safe to go back to schools, that's not going to happen. That's despite pressure from the state to reopen school buildings and likely more pressure coming in January and February as the state legislature reconvenes.
I'll bring you in, Bill. Over the course of the fall, I believe we interviewed every superintendent of the suburban school districts and then Shelby County Schools Superintendent Joris Ray. And you know, you just felt their nervousness, their optimism in the case of the suburban schools that so far some of them were doing really well and they weren't having to close. But you could kind of feel them sitting on the edge of their seat that they were just in such unknown territory. What are your thoughts on the schools looking ahead to the fall?
Well, the interesting thing to me from all of the comments was that none of the superintendents we talked to were willing to say or even got close to making a judgment about what the other school districts were doing. And all of them noted that all 7 of the public school districts in Shelby County have very different circumstances in terms of student needs, also in terms of the size of the school systems as well. I think that what you saw was probably a more vocal desire among the suburban school superintendents to have students back in the classroom. And some of them wound up having to back up on that or modify that plan significantly because of the reality of COVID-19. That was the one constant in all of the decisions and all of the plans that those school systems made.
Let me go back to Laura before we get Toby in here and talk about into 2021 with CARES Act. I mean, some of the federal funding, some of those things are set to expire as we sit here on Thursday. And there's some unknowns about what Congress may pass, to extend some of the relief that has been given to everything from schools to small businesses and so on. But how could that impact 2021 if there isn't a big change at the federal level?
Well, for example, the child care assistance program that the state implemented with the Federal CARES Act money is set to expire at the end of this year. And what that means is for those places where thousands of kids were gathering to do their virtual learning together so that they could have some childcare. That is up in the air. I talked to the YMCA and Boys and Girls Club, and they're hoping that they'll be able to find some sort of funding, whether that's through TANF dollars from the state or through philanthropy dollars. They're just trying to make it seamless as possible for parents, because at the very least there's going to be a month gap between when that money expires and when most Memphis classrooms reopen, and leaving working parents in a lurch for that time.
Yeah. Let me go to you, Toby. Unless you want to comment on schools, I was going to ask the same question I asked at the top. I mean, just you can pick many, many different things, but the biggest impact that COVID has had in this past year? And again, that's kind of a dumb question on my part because it has impacted everything.
No, it has impacted everything. And the only thing for schools, she mentioned the TANF funding out there. We're sitting on north of $700 million in this fund that Governor Lee is still studying on how to spend. Now is the time to spend that money. I hope we get off of that really soon. But for me, I know that some folks, one of my tasks of the Flyers to do the numbers every day. So I get up when the Shelby County Health Department puts out their new numbers. I've done this since March, I guess, and I've looked and lived with these numbers every day. And today they're as bad as they've ever been. So for me, the biggest change has been just to watch these numbers climb and climb. So the brand new figures this morning from the health department, we now have 1,163 new cases. That's the record. That's the highest it's ever been. So far, that puts us at 58,762 total cases. There are more than 6,000 active cases of COVID-19 in Shelby County right now. That's as high as that number has ever been. It was 1,300, I think, in September. And so far, there have been 760 people in Shelby County to die of COVID-19. And that is, to me, is just an astronomical figure. If we can go back and look at the numbers later in the show, where we started and where we are now. And you think about 760 people, you put that group of people in, say, a Minglewood Hall or a space that we all kind of understand. And it's a lot of people. So for me to just watch these basic figures climb and climb and climb every day. And it's been there were times of optimism in the year where I thought, man, we're on the right course, after the mask mandate and cases really dropped. And then to watch this, then the fall surge was kind of simmering, but now we're just in this insane spike. And that's really pushing us to the brink. I mean, there were 11 ICU beds available at area hospitals yesterday, and that blows my mind. We haven't yet opened the relief hospital at 495 Union, the old commercial appeal building, because we can't staff it really. So the virus is as bad as it's ever been in Shelby County today. Even though there is a promise that we've got a vaccine on the way, which is a whole other issue there. We can talk about that, but hopefully there is promise on the way. But I think we're in for some tough sledding.
One interesting thing is in the numbers. I mean, right now, horribly, I think Tennessee is the most cases per 100,000, one key metric across all the states.
Right.
And at various points, it's been the Dakotas and other states, and we have that top spot now. But if you break down the numbers by county, of the 90 or so counties in Tennessee, Shelby is number 6 in a good way. It is one of the low. It's the rate is much too high, so I don't want to say everything's great, right. But it's about 80 per 100,000 compared to Warren and DeKalb County are about 200 plus per 100,000. And maybe I'll bring you in, Bill. One of the striking things for me in the last year has been this this kind of shifting of, one, how COVID and COVID response became political was for me shocking and unexpected. and became very political at the local level, but in different ways. And we had the mayor of Bartlett on, who is a lifelong conservative, lifelong Republican, advocating not just for masks in Bartlett and Shelby County, but for a statewide mandate, and calling on the governor to please put a statewide mandate because of the anomaly that our rate in Shelby County is, while not great, is not as bad as some of the surrounding areas. And yet, as a big medical, with our big medical industry, we are many people coming in to the hospitals to be treated, many people coming into Shelby County to work, and then going home where there's not a mask mandate. I thought that was one of the more fascinating things and just difficult things of this last year, Bill.
Right. The face mask definitely became a political symbol of its own, against the reality that the virus doesn't know any ideology, doesn't recognize any ideology or any county. Good people and bad people get the virus and spread the virus, and those two factions are clashing still to this day in the state. I think that what the virus has done on a similar scale is that it has magnified the urgency of some longstanding issues and needs that were there long before COVID-19 ever reared its ugly head. Things like the impact of poverty. And you had a lot of social justice groups who were saying this from the outset, that this has magnified those problems, and that the urgency of the virus may have prompted some new solutions to those problems as well, new ways of doing things that might come out of this pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's one of the huge. I mean, we a week or two ago, Bill, we had the head of the food bank on, head of MIFA on, and it was just a heartbreaking conversation about, the food bank is distributing, I think it's a 4x, 4 times increase in the amount of food that they're distributing across the Mid-South right now. It's just breathtaking numbers. They are thankfully able to meet the need, but that the need is there is just horrible. And yet, meanwhile, the local real estate economy is doing great. I mean, housing prices are up. There's this incredible dichotomy. And I'll go to you, Laura. That dichotomy plays out in the schools where, there's always been a dichotomy of private schools versus public schools. The class sizes are smaller. There's amenities that don't exist in many of the public schools. But in this case, most of the private schools have been able to stay open, been able to have at least a hybrid rotation of kids through the schools. They have the space to distance. And I remember Doris Ray early on saying there was no way they could possibly distance the kids in most Shelby County schools. It just wasn't possible because they have so many kids per class. And that dichotomy, and you brought up childcare with working parents. I mean, it's just sports, from Shelby County schools not playing sports to the private schools and suburban schools going ahead with sports. And it's not a value judgment on them. It's just a really harsh dichotomy.
Yeah, and going back a little bit to what we were saying earlier about kind of when this got politicized, one thing that I've wondered, and this will be for future researchers a decade from now to really dissect and see if this was part of it. But, early on, there wasn't a whole lot of demographic breakdown of how the virus was affecting different communities disproportionately. And I think once those stats became more known, that's when I started noticing that politicization start to really rise, of kind of saying, at first it's like we're all in this, and we're all equally affected, and so we all need to, kind of get on the same wagon. But as those data points started to emerge, and seeing where, especially for Black and Latinx communities, it started to become more politicized. And so that was an observation that I thought was really interesting. And because of that dichotomy, when you're talking about public and private in Shelby County schools, it's mostly Black students. And so that is just a really huge fault line of figuring out, being more considerate of where this virus has been disproportionately impacting communities.
Yeah. Toby, let's talk a little bit about business and segue maybe out of purely COVID. I mean, COVID sort of haunts and affects everything, obviously, but one of the hardest hit. It's sort of been the poster child for the business community has been restaurants.
Yeah.
And the hit they have taken, and restaurants that have closed or that are barely hanging on. And one has to expect that even more will close through the winter because although there is some amount of indoor dining going on, it's just getting too cold and rainy to sit outside in a remotely comfortable way. But talk maybe about the businesses hardest hit, but then again, this dichotomy that particularly Memphis as a distribution hub and with FedEx, as we record this, FedEx is going to release its earnings today, and they're going to be off the charts.
Sure.
And that has a spiraling positive effect on other businesses in Memphis. Help us make some sense of that.
I wish I could. Like you said a minute ago, some of it's so mysterious. Why are things so bad? And then the real estate market is just, off the charts in Memphis right now. It's really incredible to watch. And FedEx was doing great before COVID, and they had a huge holiday season last year, expected to have another huge one this year, and they're delivering the coronavirus vaccine. So that just, when the earnings come out today, I think they're going to be astronomical. Things have carried on. COVID has really put a wet blanket on so many things. People in the restaurant industry, my heart goes out to y'all because I love restaurants and bars, and they've really tried to pivot hard this year to do some different things, different concepts. You look at the little houses that they built out on the patio of Beauty Shop up here. Another really cool pivot that they've done, but they're struggling, they're hurting. And as it's getting colder, it's only going to get worse. And you feel so bad for them, and hopefully they can hang on. Hopefully there will be some federal dollars that'll flow and keep folks alive until a little bit warmer weather out there. But I did see, I was watching yesterday, I was wondering how Wuhan, China was doing. I was like, are they back to normal? What does it look like over there? And they are. It was encouraging for me to see how back to normal things were. You saw bars and restaurants filled to capacity with people not wearing masks, and people walking through night markets and going to concerts and having a great time. So hopefully better days are ahead. But again, we've got a little bit of a rough runway here. But while the virus has been going on, something I wrote recently for the Flyer, as I looked ahead to next year at some of the stuff that's going to open, these projects that have been ongoing for a while that we're finally going to get to experience maybe once the virus subsides a little bit. You've got the Renaissance Convention Center. They've been working on that since for a year, I guess. That's a $200 million renovation project of the old Cook Convention Center. It looks great. They're going to bring in a lot more color and more natural light and air into the space, which is cool. The Memphis International Airport, they're going to cut the ribbon on their big $245 million concourse modernization project next year. And that's been going on since 2014. So it'll be a nice new modern concourse. They're going to have higher ceilings, natural light, moving walkways, everything you expect in a modern airport. It's going to look really great. Collage Dance Collective, they're going to open their brand new space out on Tillman and Sam Cooper. If you guys have seen that, it looks gorgeous. Can't wait to get inside there and look. And finally, here in Midtown, the Memphian Hotel is going to open at the first part of next year. That's a $24 million, 106-room hotel. It's slated to open in April, I think is what they told the Daily Memphian. So that'll be kind of interesting to get in there and see what that's about. So, things are bleak, but hopefully with some of this stuff, Memphis will get an upgrade next year, and it'll be a bright spot on the horizon.
And I'll just stay in that more optimistic vein with you, Bill. The Tumley Park did its virtual groundbreaking this last week. So the massive, $60 million renovation and transformation of that park is underway. Overton Park Conservancy has announced what looks like a deal to completely overhaul the golf course and make it an entirely different, multi-million-dollar overhaul. Just full disclosure, I'm on the board of Overton Park Conservancy apparently forever. Other things like that, Bill, as we look ahead to some of these things that have kind of pushed on in 2021, when we do emerge from our shelters, there's going to be a lot of new stuff in Memphis.
Yeah, and that was one of the surreal things as this pandemic has reached some awful high points. You've still seen construction going on. You've still seen street work going on. It's really been a pretty big contrast to see that part of the economy continue to boom, continue to be very visible at the same time when so many businesses are hit hard and so many people have been laid off and out of work. The tourism industry has taken a big hit. And we talked with Kevin Kane of Memphis Tourism at the outset of this, who said this is probably a 2-year recovery type thing. And he was very worried at that point, and I think still is, about the workforce in the tourism economy who have folks who have moved on to other jobs. And the thinking is they may not come back to the tourism industry. We've got a lot of new hotels here.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that after the '08 recession, when housing and construction just ground to a halt, it took years and years. And some would say it was a decade before the trades people were back, just the carpenters and just all the people in construction, because so many people left that industry for so long. You couldn't just ramp back up when the economy
Home
got
builders
better.
too.
Home builders, yeah. I mean, and so that same dynamic, I think Kevin Kane said, it was one of the last shows we did in the studio, that some third of employees in Tennessee are one way or another related to hospitality and tourism, which certainly makes sense. Get ahead into 2021, I'll come back to you, Laura, about with the schools, and you can touch on other things if you'd like as well, but just with the schools, the budget request, that's obviously a huge, if I'm sure the biggest part of the county commission budget. We're beginning to get into budget season. What does the budget request look like for next year for Shelby County Schools?
Well, the most recent request was just a piece of it, almost like a preview, because they didn't share their entire budget of what they're hoping for, but they did share what they think will be able to help address some learning loss and improve literacy, which includes bringing in more teacher assistants and doing an expanded summer program for the students who are struggling the most. And so that's slated to go before the county commission. They didn't give a whole lot of reaction when it was presented, but that is going to be a big talk of what's next. And the past budget, which was still, within COVID-19 panic, the county commission rejected I believe it was 21 million to go to schools, just because of they cited, budget constraints due to the economic downturn. So we'll see if that gets any traction, but that is what's on the table right now.
Just to highlight one part, which was, you're talking about the summer, maybe expanded summer programs. It would seem, I've read in other places, I've read commentators saying, or people who know something about education that I don't, that because of the early signs that there was real kids aren't doing well with virtual learning. There's more studies coming out. It's not that every kid is doing badly, but many are not. That summer would be a time to get kids caught up, to go almost to year-round school, do in person. How big a proposal, what is the scale of the proposal to expand summer learning for SCS next year? Is it all kids or is it just select kids?
It would be select kids, so it wouldn't be everyone. But the last time that I remember there being talk of year-round schooling was when Dorsey Hobson was still superintendent, and he had started a summer program open to any student that wanted to have any sort of enrichment or extra studies. And that was then seen as a way to help reduce the summer slide. And notably, the learning loss that has been measured so far was not as bad as national predictions feared.
That's good.
But still, at the same time, Shelby County Schools' performance was already pretty low. So there's still a lot of work to do. So that's kind of where that's at the moment.
Bill, you want to stay with, it is budget season for the county and I guess soon for the city, and just a lot of uncertainty. We've, on the one hand, real estate, which makes up the biggest part of, or a huge part of county and city budgets, is still doing well. But obviously a lot of people are hurting. The degree of sales tax revenue, I'm not sure where that stands. What do the budget seasons look like? And again, how does that impact schools on the county level?
The real story in the spring when the budget season start will be the Shelby County budget. Shelby County government has really been in a lot of turmoil since the county commission rejected Lee Harris, the county mayor's budget proposal, which included a wheel tax hike in it. Harris says that he will be back with something along those lines in the new budget, and he's never really accepted the budget that the commission put together after rejecting his budget out of hand. At this point, the county's got about $27 million of red ink that could go up. At the same time, the cash flow in the county reserves, which the commission is using, goes to pay cash flow, operating expenses, until February, when the tax revenues really come rolling in to county government. If they continue to use the reserve, the county is going to have to do short-term borrowing, which could affect the bond rating. So the city's going to have some lean times to coming out of this pandemic. But the real story, the real discussion to watch is going to be county government's discussion.
We could have done a whole show on this, but I'll just throw it at you, Bill, with a minute left here. Another of the biggest stories, it probably would have been the biggest story if not for COVID, was the protests against the police protests as an outcome of George Floyd and other incidents around the country. What sort of police reforms have we seen, and what sort of police reforms might we see next year coming out of the protests that happened nationally and locally?
The biggest thing that happened was that a majority on the city council voted to take off the November ballot a referendum that would have allowed police and firefighters to live outside of Shelby County. That was key to Mayor Jim Strickland's philosophy and strategy for building a bigger police department. The council members say they're not necessarily against a bigger police department. They think that the people who police who police Memphis should actually live where they work.
All right. Well, we will get deeper into those issues in the new year. This is our last show of the year, given that where Christmas and the New Year's fall. Thank you all for watching. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can get past episodes of the show at WKNO.org, or you can download the full podcast of the show from the Daily Memphian site or wherever you get your podcasts. We will see you in January.